Hey, mi gente, I'm Moon, and this is OG Interviews. My guest is an artist, an instructor, an illustrator, and he's talking to the moon. ADDIE AFABLE, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here, man. I appreciate it.
Same here, Moon.
All right, let's start with the beginning. Tell me about your origins of why you wanted to be an artist.
Oh, a long time ago. I might not look it, but I'm 46. So in high school, in the mid 90s, I was basically like into comic books a lot, and then I also unconsciously loved Japanese animation. Like you grow up and like you see all these, I moved around a little bit, not too much, but like I was from the Philippines. I saw, like cartoons there. And then I moved to Saudi Arabia and I got introduced to comic books. And also, I didn't have much to do in Saudi Arabia. I didn't even go to school for 2 years there. And I was basically like just doing, watching cartoons. And the funny thing is, I was watching cartoons in Arabic. And I was watching these cartoons and I remembered Kimba, the White Lion, and some other like Three Musketeers type of type. And then also I remembered when I was younger, I was watching Voltes 5 in the Philippines. So those three types of animations and also getting into comic books in Saudi Arabia. I think one of my dad's friends, my dad was an architect, so he had a lot of friends who were into that, like art stuff and things like that. And he introduced me to comic books. I think it was a G.I. Joe comic book. And it was basically like Snake Eyes. I think if I remember right, it was the silent one. It didn't have any letters. I'm guessing 24 pages of just panels of action and like basically Snake Eyes, kind of a ninja commando, a military type of comic book, G.I. Joe. Basically, like he go into the base, infiltrate it, and then I found cover. I saw it was so cool. He's all in black, and he had Uzi, and he's hanging from the side of the wall, and he was a ninja. And at that point, I didn't even know what a ninja was. I was only like, like 6 through 8 and things like that, one of those times. So anyway, from there, I think all these things were subconscious in me. When I came here, around 1985, I was 8 at the time. I remember all these things, and like as a kid, these influences, and you don't realize that until you get older. So I went, so when I got here, my influences were watching, oh, they actually have a G.I. Joe show. They made like an animation. And then I watched some of that, but I was more into like other things like the 80s comic, Saturday night morning cartoons. Some of these kids haven't experienced Saturday morning cartoons unless they go to YouTube nowadays. So that was really nice. You get to introduce, that was the heyday cartoons, at least for me. And you get a little nostalgic, like you have all these Transformers, Thundercats, and all that good stuff. And the only reason, and the funny thing is, I don't watch too much of the G.I. Joe comic books, but I only go there if I see Snake Eyes, or sometimes I look with Lady Jane. So basically, like mostly like in things. I used to remember drawing. So this goes back into my artistic part. So my father was an architect. To give you an idea of who influenced me in that particular set was my parents. In this particular case was my father. I remember in Philippines, going a little bit back, I remember in Philippines, we were having a party And so I was maybe around 4 or 5, I forget. And they were having a party at the house. And of course, it's such like some kind of thing where you're small and you're going through people's legs and stuff like that, or during going to the party and looking for my father. And I have no idea why I wanted to draw a family. I just wanted to draw stick figures. I wanted to draw my father, my mother, and me, and stuff like that. And for some reason, like I didn't know how to draw it. And then, but I knew my father was an architect, so I'm thinking, oh, okay, he knows how to draw. So I just told, I was looking for my father. Unfortunately, he was a little intoxicated at the time. So like, he just smiles at me and taps me on the head. And then I don't know if I was disappointed, but I didn't think nothing of it. The next day, he basically like showed me a bunch of pictures of apartment buildings. It's kind of like an interior design concept where you're looking out and into the room of an apartment, maybe a living room.
I love architecture.
Yeah, basically. So he told me just copy it. I said, isn't this a little too much for me? So I just decided, I got a pencil and I just started copying it. And I didn't know I was actually pretty good at trying to get the lines and stuff like that. So, and then I just and stuff like that. And then so going from there, the funny thing is I didn't get to go into my art in Saudi Arabia. Most of the time it's just basically like, I think to me, for a kid, that's like a 2-year vacation, not going to school.
Yeah, sure.
Video games, stuff like that. And then when I got to America, when I was 8, I got back into that thinking of being an artist. And then I ended up doing emulating the pictures I see in cartoons. One of them was Transformers, and I drew robots into cut, maybe about the size of a paper, like a letter paper. I draw the robot, I cut it out, and I would play them like I would be doing action and stuff like that. And then later on, I got into drawing at school, and half the time my favorite was like, if I remember right, it was funny. Besides, of course, art class, you also have a science class. In science class, we had this thing where you can collect all these articles, and in the front you can draw a cover, and you can draw a cover of anything that you want out of science. Like back then, Popular Science was a good magazine and stuff like that. So it could be a theme. So every single time I do that, I kind of like was waiting for it. So I was like, okay, and then I'll draw this and this and this and stuff like that. I drew, for example, there was one time where I was influenced by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and there was the robot called Fugitoid and stuff like that. And I said, oh, okay, I can draw this. It's like their Fugitoid is more of like a bubbly looking robot. It's not like a boxy looking robot. So it was more organic. So I started drawing that. It's got these like coils and stuff like that, easy to draw. And then I put it into my cover for these science journals that I have for the class. And then my science teacher told me, oh, and then you can start drawing, for a living and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that, and stuff like that. And then of course, science, you get to draw anatomy and stuff like that, and you get to draw technology. So to me, organic and technical stuff and things like that, lines were with curvature and stuff like that mixed together for me. Okay. And then growing up into high school, one of my influences would be the trying to get into comic books again. I discovered accidentally because my best friend and I, his name is Nick. He basically went with me to like a local newsstand, and we were going through the magazines, and then we saw comic books. I was like, oh, I remember these from Saudi Arabia. I remember like, and also from in Philippines and stuff like that, just vaguely. But I was like, oh, these are comic books and stuff like that. I gotta, start reading these again because I love that experience, that memory. So I think one of my biggest ones were the black and white for Conan the Barbarian, and then I ended up getting into X-Men,
Mm,
which is a great comic book run in 1980s to the 90s. Yeah.
mhm.
Um,
I love X-Men.
yeah, Uncanny X-Men and stuff like that with Art Adams, and then later on, those were my biggest influences when it comes to comic book art. And then I started appreciating the art of comic books, and
Sure.
then I had this little kind of thing every week or every 2 weeks, and then basically I started collecting all these comic books, and then at that point I started to think, oh, I'll start organizing these things, and then I just subconsciously organized them in a way of appreciating artwork. So all the ones that I like, the good art, and the things that would make I realized would later influence my own art style and stuff like that. And then later on, like I would just categorize like uh, uh, comic book art with these pieces of masterpieces. To me even now I consider them masterpieces. These people who drew panels and like drew splash pages and posters of comic book art. To me, that was my thing, And people like some of my art friends, they like oil paintings, they like other things. To me, comic book art was the best.
That's
So
that's what I was going to ask you. If you could describe your style of art that you do today.
that's a little contradiction in some ways because I was influenced by comic book art,
Okay.
but my art style now is anime. And the funny thing is, I can still draw comic book art, and I still draw it as a passion, and it was something that helped me. But I realized that when I was younger, I was more influenced in certain ways for the Japanese animation.
Sure.
And for some reason, when I evolved as an artist, and then I'm going to go into high school, every single thing that accumulated, I was drawing a lot of comic book stuff, but then anime at the time was kind of in some ways not very popular, but then it was a niche, and I just thought, oh, this is kind of cool. Like no one really and it's also shock value and stuff like that. So for a teenager, it's very impressionable when like anime back then was full of like not necessarily that thing like things that attract teenagers. So
Mhm.
like I was basically like watching them, and while I was collecting comic books, and I didn't realize that even though I appreciated comic books in the 1990s in that art style, and I I tend to think of myself as a mixture of both. I was leaning towards the animation that I was watching eventually, like later in high school, and I mixed it together.
Hmm.
And for some reason, it became my art style now. And but the funny thing is, I call it a contradiction because a lot of times people put the two differently, and because to people in I'm just assuming to people like American comic books has a different style than the Japanese, which are more simplistic in certain ways, and then the big eyes and less cross hatching and things like that. But to me, I like both, and I wanted to incorporate both of them. But I think I only did a little bit of the comic book style, but then I leaned towards as a profession more in the anime style. And to me, I like both, but I think my own sensibilities about actually drawing something was geared towards. So you just follow, what you're. It's just like saying, when you start like writing, and then when you start making a signature, and then your hand, that's your style. When it comes to emulating the comic book style, I ended up drawing, and it ended up being the style of an anime type, which is a simplistic, more like a line work instead of the shadow work and things like that. And it was so because it became my style, like naturally, organically.